class. Welcome back to online school. Yeah, goodness. Let me just by way of reminder, before school and during passing time, it's just gonna be really critical for us to maintain social distance, right? It's gonna be really critical for us to maintain social distance, especially in that time before school in the field house. If you come early, it's been really, a lot of us have been sort of resistant to social distancing in that time, even when we're asked. So please, social distance during that time, and in between classes. I know it's hard. It's a really new routine, but it's going to help us limit the requirement to go back and forth between online and in person. We are, believe it or not, we're moving towards like our last, or this is our, what am I trying to say? We have 6 class periods left, including this one together. Okay, so let's just look at first quarter grades for a second. Some of us are not happy with, or maybe shouldn't be happy with, where we're at in our grade. So how do we finish well? Well, here's the grade breakdown for this class. We went over this at the beginning of the year, but sometimes it's hard to remember. 30% of your grade is homework. 30% of your grade is memory quizzes, and 30% of your grade is tests. Okay. I had a student the other day ask me, Mr. Swans, I got an A on my test, but my grade didn't get better. What's up with that? It was a great question, right? Well, if you, the issue for this student was, well, all of their test grades had been A's, which is great. That's fantastic. But because we grade on weighted categories, adding another A grade into that test average, that 40% of his total grade that counts for test, doesn't change their grade at all. So we had to look back. What's affecting their grade negatively? Is it that they have missing assignments? Is it that they did poorly on their memory tests? So if you're looking at your grade going, how do I improve in this final couple of weeks? You got to look, well, where is it that my grade is being pulled down? Is it that I have missing assignments? If you do, get those assignments in as soon as possible. Is it that memory quizzes, well, you haven't done very well, maybe because you haven't practiced hard enough? You got to practice. So let's look at what we have left, right? We have three things you can do in terms of homework. One, if you've got missing assignments, get those done and get those into me as soon as possible, okay? In terms of grading, on-time work is going to get graded first. Don't expect if you turn in an assignment late that I'm going to grade it immediately. I'll get to it, but I'm not going to get to it immediately, okay? On-time stuff's going to get my priority. Second, you have the Reading Guide 3 is due on Friday, okay? Reading Guide 3 is due Friday, so you're reading another big chunk of Genesis. Hopefully you've been working on that already. Maybe you did some of that yesterday. That's great. So get that in on time for sure. If you're behind, don't get more behind by not getting the stuff that's due now in. Okay, so get Reading Guide 3 done, and then make sure you're working on old stuff if you haven't gotten that done. So you have Reading Guide 3 due on Friday, and then a week from Friday, so basically a week from tomorrow, you've got your last Bible project video assignment of the quarter. And this one's a little bit longer. It's 3 short videos. It's about 15 minutes total, about words related to sin and injustice. Okay, so the Hebrew words are kata, pesha, and avan. And it's going to talk you through what those mean and how they're nuanced slightly differently. And we'll see, like, okay, as we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about sin today. That's going to play out in a lot of different ways in our world. We need to be aware of that. Okay, so 30% is homework. So get done anything that you've missed. Get Reading Guide 3 done, and get that last Bible project video done, okay? And again, those Bible project videos are really straightforward. Watch the video, answer the questions on the worksheet. Then 30% of your grade is quizzes. Now we've had a quiz already this morning, and then we've got one more quiz this quarter. The chance to make up some ground if your grade has struggled. Over the last 2 weeks, we've memorized Genesis 26 and 27. That was last week. This week we memorized Genesis 28 and 29. Next week, if it's B Day, next Monday, I'm going to ask you to put it all together, and you're going to write for me Genesis 1, 26 through 29. Okay. Now, hopefully, you've memorized both of those, so this is just review. It's a little bit challenging in that you're having to do it all at the same time, but this isn't meant to be super, super hard. Now, if you haven't studied to learn Genesis 1, 26 to 29, then you've got some work to do this weekend. You got to be ready. All of our quizzes to this point have been 10 points. This one's going to be 20 points because it's twice as long. Okay, so it's a great opportunity to recoup some points. Maybe you've been really struggling on these. A 20 out of 20 is really going to help you. Maybe you've been doing great, and look, if you blow this one off, a 0 out of 20 is really going to hurt you. Okay, so make sure you're ready for that quiz next week, and then like about a week from next Wednesday, we'll have our Unit 3 test. And it'll be a Wednesday or a Thursday, I forget which. And we'll have our Unit 3 test, and I'll post the quizzes for that pretty soon. Granted, we're just starting Unit 3 today, so make sure, like if your test grades have struggled, that you crush this one. Use the quizzes. Okay, make sure you review the worldview, the AACS worldview statement, the 8 worldview questions, and the worldview definition. Okay, all of that stuff will be on there throughout the course of this year. Okay, we're gonna repeat those over and over and over again, and make sure that you're that you're looking over the notes, that you're reviewing, and using the quizzes to your advantage. Okay. Let's jump in. We find ourselves here at chapter 3, and maybe you know that chapter 3 is the story of the fall. Now, when we say fall, if I said, well, yesterday I was out for a run and I fell, what would that suggest about my intention? Is the word fall sort of in our vocabulary an intentional or unintentional thing? Well, I think with the way we use the word fall, we tend to mean it as like an unintentional thing. I fell. No one falls on purpose unless maybe you're trying to look like you've taken a charge in basketball. Maybe you fall intentionally there. But by and large, when we say fall, we mean something that's unintentional. But when we're talking about Adam and Eve's fall, we're talking about something that's very intentional. Maybe better would be the expression like rebellion. Okay, so we want to sort of keep that in mind as we look at this text. Yes, there's going to be deception, but there's going to be some intentionality here. Okay, so we start at the beginning. It says, "Now the serpent was more crafty than any other beast of the field that the Lord God had made." Pause. Are we talking about snakes here? Is this a story about a snake? I don't think so, right? Snakes don't talk, do they? Maybe we find them icky, but this doesn't seem like this story isn't really about snakes. Who is it about? It's about Satan, right? And what is Satan? Well, the word Satan means accuser. Satan's actually a title. Okay, his name is Lucifer. Okay, not the show on Fox. Okay, his name is Lucifer, and he's what? Well, he's an angel, right? So we have Lucifer here, Satan, Hasatan, the accuser, showing up in the form of a serpent or a snake, right? So what's Satan's deal? Why is he doing this? This is a pretty critical question for us. Why is Satan doing this? Well, most of us, I think, if we were to ask, why does Satan rebel? Like we'll realize real quick, Satan's rebelling against God. Why is Satan rebelling? Most of us would say something along the lines of, well, he wanted to be more powerful than God, or he wanted to be greater than God. But if we think about it, that doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense, does it? Do you think Satan knows that he can't be more powerful than God? Do you think Satan knows that he can't actually dethrone God? I kind of think he does. I know I can't be an NBA center. Okay, I know that I can't. It's just not going to happen. I'm too short. I think Satan knows that he can't be more powerful than God. But what can, so if that's not what Satan's goal is, then what is it? What's set him off? What's upset him? Well, let's think about. We got to think about this in terms of what Scripture says. What does Scripture say is the most powerful being on in existence? Right? Well, what's the most powerful being? Well, hopefully that's easy. It's God, right? Well, then what? What's sort of number two in terms of all of the created things? What's next in terms of power and authority? Well, it certainly seems that it's angels. That in terms of a hierarchy of power, God, angels, and then what's next after it? Who's sort of number three in terms of authority? Well, maybe this surprises you, maybe it doesn't. But next would be humans. God's most powerful. Next is angels. Then it's humans. Okay, we're created in God's image, but it certainly seems that angels are too. But angels are in the presence of God. They enter into God's presence in a way that we don't. They are able to manifest themselves in our reality as well as in God's reality. They know more. They were present before. They seem to be present. They seem to have a greater knowledge and a greater power base. But what's interesting in this is that Hebrews says that angels are to minister or serve humans. So angels are designed to minister or serve humans. Interesting, right? And then it gets even more interesting. In 1 Corinthians, Paul tells us that humans will judge angels. That humans in some way will judge angels. So God says to angels, you serve humans. You take care of them in some way. So some way and somehow, angels are participating in our world. We don't know exactly what that looks like. We get very, very sort of vague hints and clues. And then it says that God's going to, it would seem that God is going to open our eyes to the work of angels in the resurrection. That at the end of all things, we'll be sort of aware of the roles that angels play, and then we'll assess them, which is strange. It's just hard. It's hard to imagine. Are angels going to get a grade point average? Do they have a free throw percentage? A batting average? What does it mean that we'll judge them? Well, again, the Bible says we'll judge angels. Yikes. Okay. That's an incredible amount of authority and responsibility that we're going to be entrusted with. Interesting. So what about this sets off Satan? I think this is the key. In our economy, in the way we think about power and authority, does the lesser serve the greater, or does the greater serve the lesser? Think about that for a minute. Does the lesser serve the greater, or does the greater serve the lesser? Often, right, in our world, in our reality, the lesser in many ways serves the greater. Now, maybe all we mean is that simply, people with more money end up employing people with less money. NBD. Okay, yep, that's how that's going to go. Doesn't seem to be a problem, but there's a sense in which here, the lesser are serving the greater. We've also seen in terms of like slavery and servants that those with less power, maybe less knowledge, maybe less political power, less physical power, serve the greater. Okay, those who have more power. And often we see this as sort of this ends up happening on our teams, right? The underclassmen, the freshmen, are maybe treated poorly. They're made to carry the water. They're made to clean up. They're made to sort of suffer at the hands of the upperclassmen. Now, hopefully, that's not the way things are on our teams, but we've seen this, right? Or we're aware of it. In human society, often it's the assumption that the lesser serves the greater. But notice here, who does God have serving who? Are the angels greater? Yeah. They have greater power, greater authority, greater knowledge. And yet they're asked to serve the lesser, humans, us. And yet God says, well, humans will judge you, angels. Yikes. I think this is what sets Satan off. Satan doesn't want to be greater than God, but Satan knows that he's greater than human beings. And he says to God, no, I don't want to serve human beings. They're less than me. They should glorify me. They should serve me. They should honor me, not me serve them. Does that make sense? Satan isn't foolish enough to think he's more powerful than God. What he does know is that he's more powerful than us and wants, therefore, to be served and honored by us, not to serve and honor us. Okay. So notice what God does in response. Satan's ticked off. Lucifer is all bent out of shape because he doesn't want to serve those who are less than him. Notice what God does. God sends his son Jesus. God himself comes, is born as a human being. He lives among human beings. And he said, I have not come to be served, but to serve. God himself comes to serve humans. And not just serve in terms of minister to, but to die in our place. And the Hebrews says, and the angels marveled when they saw it. It's not just that they're in awe of Jesus in some sort of vague way. Satan refused to serve human beings, and what does God do in response? God serves human beings himself to the point of death, even death on a cross. So notice, in God's economy, in God's conception of the world, the greater serves the lesser. Now, I have a daughter, right? She's 3. She's smart. She's beautiful. She's made in God's image. But in some really practical ways, I am, her mom is, greater than her. What do you mean? Well, she can use the potty. She's been able to do that in less than a year. Coming up on a year. She can use the potty. She can even do most of it all by herself. But her mom and I still have to wipe her. Yes, I wipe butts on a regular basis. Welcome to parenting, right? She can't cook for herself. She can't clean for herself, though she does pick up. Her mom's been really good at training her on that. She can't cook. She can't clean. She can't feed herself. She can't dress herself. She can't fully go to the potty by herself. She can't bathe herself. Left on her own, chances are she'd die. She needs her mom and I. We're in some ways greater. But imagine I said, look, Ellie's her name. Look, Ellie, I'm greater. You serve me. You get me dinner. Go get my clothes and things for work. Tie my tie. Go start the car and drive me to work because I am the greater and you are the lesser. Therefore, you must serve me. If you saw this, you'd be like, someone call Child Protective Services and an insane asylum because this guy is messed up. That is not how you parent. That's not how you serve a child. That's not what you do for a lesser. Obviously, imagine if a lifeguard, that an adult, maybe they're 18, maybe they're 25, maybe they're 30, sitting in the chair above a pool, looking at a kid, looking at maybe an older person, going, dude, you're terrible at swimming. I'm way better than you. But clearly you're on the verge of drowning, and that's your fault because you're lesser. Please go get me a hot dog. Like, imagine. Like, the whole idea of a lifeguard is that the lesser serves the greater, right? I'm there, like the lesser, the greater is there to protect and care for the lesser. But how many times in our political conversations is like, look, you're poor, and you're poor because it's your fault. So until you stop being terrible at life, I'm not going to help you. Like, what? Okay. Again, like, we need to be thoughtful about like what kind of help is actually helpful, making sure our help doesn't hurt. But if we have this idea that it's the design of the lesser to serve the greater, we're not thinking in God's way. We're not thinking according to God's kingdom. God serves us, the lesser. God commands angels to serve the lesser, us. That's the way God has designed it. We as seniors, as captains, our job is not to pick on the lesser, it's not to pick on the freshmen or the sophomores. It's to encourage them and help them to grow and become better, that in 4 years, when they're the captains, when they're the team leaders, that they'll do an amazing job. Not abuse or belittle the freshmen. Does that make sense? The greater serves the lesser in God's economy. All right, so Satan shows up in the garden. Remember, Adam and Eve have been given this, and they're just called the man and the woman at this point, but Adam and Eve have been given this command to care for and protect the garden. So as Adam and Eve's family gets bigger, they're going to expand the garden out to accommodate the size of their family, and they have to protect the garden from threats. So Satan shows up and he says to the woman, did God actually say, you shall not eat from any tree in the garden? Did God say that? Well, Eve responds to the serpent. She says, we may eat from the tree, we may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden. But God said, you shall not eat from you shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the midst of the garden, neither shall you touch it, lest you die. Oy, oy, oy. Okay. So no, Eve gets it right. She's right. God says, no, you can eat from any of the tree in the garden, just not the one. But notice what Satan's question implies. Satan's question implies that God is stingy, that God's not actually good, that God is keeping from them the things that they need. If God had said, you can't eat from any tree of the garden, Adam and Eve would die. But it's also sort of an obviously wrong question, right? This is interesting. We've learned this in studying negotiations and sales, that asking someone a no question, a question that they can easily respond no to, actually sets people at ease. It actually makes them more susceptible to do what you want them to do. That's curious. It's a curious thing. Anyway, so he asked this sort of obviously wrong question. Did God say that you can't eat at all? And that's absurd. But it also implies that maybe God's commands are absurd. So Eve answers correctly. She says, we may eat from the fruit of the trees in the garden, but we can't eat from the fruit of the tree that's in the midst of the garden. We know it as the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Neither shall you touch it, lest you die. Now, you may note, God didn't say, neither shall you touch it. Now, the question is that a problem? Well, it is adding to what God has said, but I don't know that it's adding to what God has said in a way that's problematic. We do this sort of thing all the time, right? This is traditional in every culture and in every place. There's a thing that's dangerous. Imagine because of some construction, something, a pit was dug on campus. Maybe it's in an area where you might walk as you go from to and from class or to and from sports practice, you have to pass by this pit. Well, what would we as a school tell you? Don't fall in the pit. Don't play in the pit. Maybe there's water in the bottom of the pit. Maybe the walls are very, very steep, and if you fell, you could hurt yourself or die, right? We would say, don't fall in a pit. Don't fall in the pit. But what else might we say? Well, we might put signs up around the pit. Like the idea is, don't get hurt in the pit. Don't fall in the pit. Don't play in the pit. But what would we do in order to ensure that? Well, we would probably by law, have to put up a fence around the pit, right? Not only do we not want you to fall and get hurt, but we're going to put a fence around it so that you don't get near it. Does that make sense? So here, what Eve is doing is not ultimately a problematic thing. What Eve is doing is she's putting a fence around the tree. She says, look, we're not going to eat from it. We're also not going to touch it. That's not problematic, at least not at this point. It can be problematic. Where we're going to see in Jesus' discussions with the Pharisees and the Sadducees in the New Testament is that what's happened is that the Pharisees and Sadducees have put up so many fences around so many of God's commands that it's actually keeping them from loving their neighbor, and that's a problem. That's where it is going to be problematic. But in general here, it doesn't seem that Eve's inclusion of neither shall we touch it is problematic. In fact, if she had kept that part, she actually would have saved her much trouble, right? All right. Now here this becomes significant. Notice what the serpent says here. He says, but the serpent said to the woman, you will not surely die. For God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Now, this is a critical moment. Here we are. They're at the tree. Sorry, let me draw a tree here. They're at the tree. Okay? And the tree's got some fruit. Let's see. This is high-level technology and art happening here, right? See my fruit? Tree's got fruit. Well, how does a tree function in the ancient world? Remember, the person writing this story down is Moses, okay? The people hearing this story as written for the first time are people traveling from Egypt to Canaan in the desert. Today they're called Bedouin. They're desert peoples who follow food and water. They travel in order to have enough food and water to survive. Well, in these cultures, trees often become functionally courthouses. Okay? So trees function as a courthouse. It's a place where, if there's a dispute in the community, the elders would gather in order to make judgments. Now, we live in a place where trees are everywhere. Trees surround our campus. There's trees in our yards. There's trees on that line the highways as we drive to and from school. Well, in the desert, trees are rare and they're vital. Look, in the 120-degree temps, super dry temperatures of the Israeli and the Sinai deserts, the heat is intense. Now, when I take students there, often students, especially the guys, right, they want to be in sneakers or flip-flops. They want to be in shorts, no shirt, no hat. They want to, our mindset is wearing as little clothes as possible is going to be the best. Now, if we were in the Amazon rainforest where the humidity is really high, yeah, that makes total sense, but not in the desert. Think about Muslim women from Saudi Arabia, desert-dwelling people. How are they dressed? Remember, they're covered head to toe, often in black, often just their eyes visible. Why? Well, look, that sun is so intense, so hot. What happens is exposed skin is prone to burn, and it's gonna leach it's gonna leach moisture out of you. So on those really long, intense hike days that we do when we're in Israel, I require you gotta have your shirt on. You gotta have shorts. If it's really hot, long sleeves are better, especially if it's a light, loose, breathable fabric like cotton, right, or a water wicking fabric. Hat is going to be vital. What little heat a hat, shirt, even pants hold in is going to be way less than the heat and the moisture loss that's going to happen if your sun is exposed or if your skin is exposed to the direct sunlight. Sunburn and thirst are deadly in the desert, and covering yourself is a way of preventing that. So when you see shepherds out in the desert with their flocks at midday, they're tucked under. They're looking for shade anywhere they can find it, even if it's just enough shade, whether it's from a rock or from a small bush or a tree. Enough shade to just get your head out of the sun can be enough to make a significant difference in terms of whether you're going to have heat stroke and potentially die or not. Okay. So trees were vital, and they're rare in the desert. So wherever there's a tree, it's a significant place, and so it becomes the place where these traveling communities would gather to settle disputes. Trees were also used in judgment, and it's a particular form of judgment. It's called post-mortem desecration of the dead. Maybe you remember this from your vocab. Post-mortem desecration of the dead. So trees are used as courthouses. They're used for judgment, particularly post-mortem desecration of the dead. You're like, what's that? Well, in the Old Testament in particular, and pretty clearly, if you murder someone, your life is forfeit. You're going to be executed by the community, by God's law. Okay? Now, that's controversial for us for a whole bunch of reasons that, well, really come up sort of later. We're going to talk about that more as we talk about justice in second semester. But in the Old Testament, if you murder, your life is forfeit. You're going to be executed if you're caught. Well, that's considered just. You took a life, your life is therefore forfeit. You pay for the life you took with your own life. The scales of justice are balanced, in a sense. Okay. Now, there's a problem. What do you do when the crime is really egregious? What do you do with the likes of the guy who, shut up that country music concert in Las Vegas? What do you do with a guy like Dylan Roof, who walks into a church Bible study and shoots and kills 8 or 9 people? What do you do with the people that walk into schools and murder people? These crimes are outrageous, egregious. They've taken multiple lives. Even their execution doesn't seem to balance the scales of justice. Well, the ancients had a really interesting approach to this, largely symbolic. But think about Egypt. Think about where the Israelites were coming from. What did they do with dead bodies? Well, they mummified them, right? They sought to preserve them. And not only did they preserve them, but when they buried them with all sorts of stuff, right? One of the pharaohs was buried with a boat, because in the afterlife it was thought they needed a boat. They were buried with food. They were buried with their mummified cats. They were buried with weapons and money, because these were things that they were going to need in the afterlife. So remember, like this mindset, the importance of a proper burial sort of lingers all over the Middle Eastern world. Not everyone mummified the way Egypt did, but in Israel, like even to this day, if someone dies, you have to bury them the same day. Now, part of that's functional. For most of human history, there was no such thing as refrigeration. So if someone died, if you let that body sit out long, it was going to be problematic. It was going to stink. It was going to spread disease, etc. So burying was really important. So it was a requirement to bury, in part because, well, the peoples around the Middle East thought that how your body was buried had some played a role in your next life. So what the Egyptians would do, if you've committed a crime that was particularly egregious, and we'll see an example of this later, if you killed multiple people, if you betrayed the pharaoh, if executing you just wasn't quite enough, what they would do is they would execute you, and then they would hang your body on a tree or on a city gate. Why? Well, they said they hung the body on later on we'll see. Well, they hung the body on a tree that the body would be eaten by birds. What's the symbol there? Well, if mummification was to prepare you for the next life, to sort of preserve your body for the life that was to come, what does it mean to let the body be eaten by birds? Well, like this gruesome symbol, so hopefully it's sort of obvious. Like if you if your body is destroyed in this life, it's going to sort of rob from you your afterlife. So I'm using a term, and I'm going to use it technically, right? This is a way of, like, to hang a body on a tree and let it rot publicly was a way of saying this person is damned. This person is going to hell. This person has committed a crime so egregious that even their afterlife should be taken from them. Does that make sense? That's called postmortem desecration of the dead. And actually, it's used in the Bible. God says in Deuteronomy, cursed is anyone who hangs on a tree. So God says, look, if someone commits a crime that's really egregious and executing them just isn't enough, hang their body on a tree. Now, no, it's only symbolic. God then says, but look, you must take the body down before sunset. Otherwise, it makes the whole country unclean. It's just symbolic. It's just showing, look, this person's done something really, really terrible. And in some ways, I think maybe we need something like this. We need a way of saying, look, not only has this person committed a crime, but they've committed a horrible, horrible crime. I don't know that we have that in our culture. It's sort of problematic. How do we respond to the Dylan Roofs of our world? Okay. So here we are. Here's Satan at a tree, a particular tree. What's the tree called? Well, the tree is called the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Oh, so what we're saying is that I think the tree of the knowledge of good and evil functions for Adam and Eve as their place of judgment. Remember, they're made in the image of God. They have a responsibility to protect, which is going to mean judge. If something evil comes in the garden, they're going to have to deal with it. That's part of their job. That's part of their role as God's image bearer. And notice it's called the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So question, do Adam and Eve know good from evil? Do Adam and Eve know good from evil at this point? Many of us have been maybe taught to say, well, no, they didn't know good from evil. But I think that's wrong. What evil did they know? Well, first, is the tree evil? No, it's tree. Is the fruit evil? Is this somehow like sin fruit? No. In fact, Eve's going to look at the fruit in a minute, and it's going to look like the other fruit of the garden. Now, we picture apples, right? This comes out of medieval art. Makes sense. Fruit trees, we think apples. We're from, even here in America, like in terms of like fruit trees, we're part of that European tradition. And it's a great visual. It's bright red on a dark green background. Awesome. But apples weren't native to the Middle East. When we think of Israel, we think figs, dates, pomegranates, olives, or grapes. And you're like, well, olives aren't fruit, and grapes don't grow on trees; they grow on vines. Though the word "etz," the Hebrew word for tree, is broader than ours. Plant, wood, and grapevines do have something like a stump, which might qualify as a tree. And fruit here just means like produce, not anything that grows on a plant. Okay. So we're thinking figs, dates, olives, pomegranates, or grapes is at least what the ancient Israelites would have thought of in their mountainside farm. Okay. What was the evil thing? Well, it's not the tree, it's not the fruit. What makes the tree special is God's command not to eat. It's God's command to not eat that particular fruit from that particular tree. Okay, it's a command that makes it special, not anything about the tree itself. So what Adam and Eve knew was evil was eating from that tree. God had told them. That tree functioned to teach Adam and Eve good from evil. They knew it already. Does that make sense? They They knew good from evil. There was only one evil thing in their world, and that was for them to eat the fruit. They knew good from evil already. So notice what Satan says. You will not surely die. Now, do they know that that's a lie? Yeah, he's contradicting God. Right then and there, Eve should have stopped him and said, whoa, we've got a problem, right? And then he says, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Did they know good from evil? Yes, they knew eating from the tree was evil. And then he says, you will be like God. Were they like God? Yes. They're made in God's image. So here, what Satan is doing is he's contradicting God and trying to get Adam and Eve to believe that they are less than what God has created them to be. Satan says, you're not really like God unless you eat the fruit. You won't really know good and evil unless you eat the fruit. And God says, no, you're made in my image. You know good from evil because I told you. Saints, what are you believing about yourself that is less than what God has created, like God has created you to be? God has created you in his image. He has created you good, male and female, to rule over his planet, to take care of it, and to be the reflection of his character. This is the way Satan is trying to deceive us all along. You're not good enough, Satan says. You're not good enough unless you do this thing. God says, no, I've created you good. Believe in me. Follow my command. Satan gets Eve to think, if I really want to be like God, I've got to disobey God's command. If I really want to be like God, I have to decide good and evil for myself. She's got to take from God the responsibility of deciding good and evil, of stating what's good and evil, and do it herself. Saints, don't fall into this trap. Don't fall into this trap. Becoming like, you're already made in God's image. And the way you perfectly express being God's image bearer is not by making up good and evil for yourself, but by following his commands, following his definitions, because they're right and true. So notice, the woman, what should Eve have done at this moment? And maybe in a sense, why doesn't God intervene? God doesn't intervene because he doesn't have to. His purpose in creating humans was for them to represent him. Of course, God could have stepped in and smashed the head of the serpent, kicked Satan out of the garden. But he has entrusted Adam and Eve to discern good from evil and protect his garden and his world. He's not stepping in because he's entrusted them with this responsibility. He's given them will and authority. So what should Eve have done? Someone said, pray to God. No, Eve doesn't need to pray. Someone said, run away. No. God says, protect the garden. What Eve ought to have done was pick up a stone and take the serpent by the head and smash its head against the tree and let its body hang there. Eve is at the place of judgment where she was instructed to judge. She ought to have crushed the head of the serpent. Look, saints, would she have learned good from evil in doing that? Absolutely. The only way you understand the full power and strength of a temptation is by resisting it to the very end. Forgive me for using a football analogy. If you're a lineman in football and you go up against an opponent and every time they knock you down, do you know exactly how strong your opponent is? Well, no. You know exactly how weak you are. You don't know how strong they are. The only way you know exactly how strong they are is by resisting the entire play, the entire game, by knocking him down. That's the only way you know how strong it is. So Eve actually would have learned more about good and evil by resisting the serpent here than she does by eating the fruit. Yeah, she's going to learn about good and evil, by experiencing and embracing evil, which actually is going to dull her ability to know good from evil. It's actually going to deaden her ability. Understand, saints, sin makes us stupid. So when the woman, so notice her focus shifts from the serpent who has just lied to her repeatedly to the fruit. When she saw that the fruit was good for food, when the fruit was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate, and she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate. And this is like the most infuriating piece, right? There's Adam, and what has Adam done? Nothing. You want Adam at some point to like step up and grab a stone and crush the head of the serpent, or to at least go like Dikembe Mutombo on her on this situation. Sorry, that's a 90s basketball reference. And like, here's Eve with the fruit. You want him to go, no, stop it, get rid of the fruit, run away. But he does nothing. Saints, evil wins when good people do nothing. Why does bullying happen? Because, saints, those watching do nothing. Bullies prevail because no one stands up to them. It's how racism wins. It's how sexism wins. It's how things like the Holocaust happen. It's how financial fraud happens in big businesses because good people say nothing. Saints, it is our command from God that we stand up and say no to evil. Stand up and say no. This is wrong. But Adam fails. It says, then the eyes of both were opened, and they knew they were naked. Remember what it said a few verses ago at the end of chapter 2. It says, and the man and the woman were both naked and unashamed. Now, understand this. I don't think this is much about clothing. This is all about the state of their relationship. Man and wife ought to be able to be naked in each other's presence without shame. That's right and good, right? Like that's part of what it means to be married. At that point, when they were first created prior to their sin, no shame. Their trust was perfect. Their love was perfect. Their honesty was unblemished. Now, as soon as they've sinned, they feel the need to hide from one another. They are ashamed. Their trust has been shattered. Their honesty has been shattered. Their love has been broken. And so they sew fig leaves together to make clothes. And again, the issue here isn't clothes. The issue here is trust. They're hiding from one another. They're feeling the need to separate from each other. It's, in some ways, almost as if their clothes become symbolic of a divorce. Okay, that was a lot. Thanks for hanging in. Thanks for persevering with this. Hopefully you've answered all the questions and you are good to go. Make sure you watch to the very end and submit via Google Classroom. Okay? Love you guys. God bless you. Have a great day. See you next week.